Hey everyone. Today we're sitting down with Leavenworth guide authors Kelly Sheridan and Drew, do you say it? Schick?
Yep,
Okay. And Drew
like the
Schick,
razor.
like the razor. I am your host, first time podcast host, Eric Jerome. I work at Kaya as the marketing manager. And yeah, we're just trying to start this series chatting with our guidebook authors to kind of shed light on their personal histories, their personalities a bit, and the histories and details of the areas for which they are the experts. So these guys did an awesome job on the Leavenworth Guidebook about a year ago, and they've been keeping it really up to date. Yeah, we're just gonna get to know a little bit more about them. So welcome, Kelly and Drew.
Thanks.
I don't know. I don't know either of you all that intimately. So I guess it'd be rad to start by just learning a little bit about your personal histories, where you're from, when did you start climbing, where did you start climbing, those sorts of things. What do you do professionally? What does your life look like a little bit? Kelly, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Psyched to be doing this. So I grew up on the East Coast in New England. I went to college at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire and started climbing there as a freshman. Literally just went to the climbing gym during orientation at school and kind of got hooked. And that's where I found, my kind of core group of friends. Started out sport climbing, a little afraid of heights, realized that bouldering was kind of where my passion was. And spent most of my time in New Hampshire, like looking for and developing uh, granite glacial erratics in the woods there. When school was finished, I was buddies with Kyle O'Meara from Road Trips, and we would be in like Bishop or Waco, and Kyle would just be ranting about Leavenworth and how excited he was to leave Waco tanks and go back to Washington and stuff. So when I finished school in 2005, I came out here on a road trip basically to visit Kyle and climb in Leavenworth and got pretty hooked right off the bat. After like a month of kind of dirt bagging it, we got an apartment in town and I got a job at a bakery in Leavenworth. I'd be off by like 1:30 every day and just go bouldering. And yeah, I really just I felt like I found my place. And Leavenworth at that time was definitely had been well traveled and well developed within Washington, but it wasn't really known outside of the state. The guidebook was a pamphlet you could pick up at the local gear shop that was like 20 loose leaf pages bound together, and had been sort of slowly added to over the years, but there wasn't much in it. And so I had the idea to write the first guidebook in 2007 was Central Washington Bouldering, which was Leavenworth and Gold Bar on the west side of the mountains. And Fred Knapp at Sharp End Books kind of took a chance on it, and an unknown area with a first time author. But yeah, the book was great. It felt like it kind of put Leavenworth on the map a little bit, and more, and then it sort of like snowballed a little bit to where people would start visiting. More problems got developed, more people would visit, on and on. I moved over to Seattle in, I think, 2008 and went to law school. And now I live in Seattle and I'm kind of a working dad type guy, but we have a cabin in Leavenworth. We get over there every time we can. And definitely slowed down on the climbing a little bit with the career, but I love still going out and doing circuits and stuff like that. So
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, there's so many things I want to dive into there.
I guess one thing I missed in the
Yeah.
middle of that. So like right when I had graduated law school, I was just starting out as a lawyer. The Leavenworth or the Central Washington book was pretty darn outdated by that point. Like there were twice as many areas in Leavenworth as there were in the guidebook. And so in 2014, I put out like a standalone Leavenworth book that was more of a modern book. It was full color and glossy pages. And yeah, it added like 1,100 problems or something like that to the existing guide. And the Gold Bar and Skykomish area kind of got carved off. And another climber, Pablo Zuleta, did a guidebook to that, which is phenomenal as well. And so we're the Kaya, I don't know the exact numbers, Drew, you can probably fill me in, but the Kaya app for Leavenworth has a couple hundred more problems, I think, than the print guide from 2014.
Yeah.
And the plan is for Drew and I to jointly put out another print book in the next couple of years with Sharp End again. And that I think that will sort of close the like golden age of Leavenworth development. Never say never about like new problems getting found, but I think at this point it's like new problems here and there. It's not new areas that are popping up.
Yeah, definitely not by the road.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the golden age and the history of the development. But first, Drew, do you mind giving your little intro?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time to listen to us and ask questions. I live in Wenatchee. I'm a lifelong Washington resident. Grew up kind of bouncing back and forth between the west and east side of the Cascades. Went to high school in Olympia, the state capital here. And my parents had property in Mazama, which is like a little town up in the North Cascades, and learned to climb up there in my teenage years. There's a lot of little kind of humble crags up there, and some outward bound schools up there. And then also there was a very early gym in Olympia called the Warehouse that was pretty close to our house. So could go there a lot after school and met a lot of cool people there that had already kind of started going to Leavenworth, but nobody was bouldering that much. And then around senior year of high school, college transition, I was spending more time on the east side and met Kyle O'Meara again, the legendary
like
Kyle
have
O'Meara.
him. We should have him here if we're gonna spend half the time talking about him.
And he, also sort of was constantly raving to me about Leavenworth, and went over there with him a few times, and just through coincidence met some of the fixture regular folks there, Jens Holston, Max Hassan, Kelly as well, Cole Allen. And yeah, I mean, immediately I was completely transfixed that this was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And these guys were out there doing it as real as can be. And it just completely changed my worldview at the time, as cliche as that is. So yeah, pretty much just kind of started following along with what they were doing, and spending as much time as possible out there between classes in college and weekends, and just scrubbing new problems and exploring, always trying to hike to the next plateau and look around for the next thing, and because that's what they were doing. So feel pretty fortunate to have run into such a genuine crew of people that just really love to be outside, and had a lot of respect for the area, and just kind of could see how special it was from the beginning. And the coincidence of meeting those people is, not many folks get to experience that. So feel pretty lucky for that. That's kind of my story in a nutshell. Now I live in Wenatchee, spent a lot of time actually living in Leavenworth after college, and working various jobs there, living in my van in different houses, all the different dirtbag, stereotypes, and eventually migrated a little bit east to Wenatchee, which is the bigger city about 20 miles down the road. And now I am the head coach at the Rock Gym there. It's an awesome facility. We have a really unique facility here that's not part of like a more corporate gym model, so it's really special. We've got a great community, awesome kids, and love living here in Central Washington.
Sweet. Thanks, Drew. So if you guys were to put, just for some context, like a year in which you kind of first started joining the Leavenworth development scene, what year would that be for each of you? And then when did you two actually meet each other and start climbing together?
I moved out there in 05, and I think is that when you started at Central, Drew?
Man, yeah, that I don't know if I could remember an exact time, but it was definitely right around there. I mean, yeah, 05, 06, right in that range.
Because Kyle was living in Leavenworth but going to school at Central about an hour away. That shows where his priorities were. I remember he brought you up shortly after you started school. He brought you up climbing, and that's how we met.
Yeah, it was right in that time frame.
Yeah, Kyle would be an awesome guy to talk to. He's had such a huge impact on not just like the Washington scene, but he's also had the California era, the Utah era. Now he's living in the New River Gorge, and I'm sure he's gonna leave his mark there too. So
like he's changed like the climbing lexicon a little bit. Like I see people say these like weird phrases that are so obviously Kyleisms, and they're like they pop up like anywhere he goes, he like leaves his little like linguistic mark. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So who were some of the other big players around that time? I know Johnny Goguchi is a name that I hear all the time in the area. Who else kind of ushered in that first era of bouldering development? And are you able to share some history on who were the first people to climb in Leavenworth? When did people start climbing there and thinking of it as a climbing place? And what did that transition look like into what it is today?
Yeah, it's
feel
kind of
like-
hard to say. What side did you?
I was gonna say I should let you take this, but I wanted to start it by mentioning John Sherman, famously enough, mentioned Leavenworth in his Stone Crusade book as somewhere to just pass on by, essentially, and that it wasn't worth more than a quick circuit at the famous Swiftwater area. It wasn't early on. It wasn't very notable to the folks in the U.S. bouldering scene, but regardless,
I think Verm
Take
said
it.
like there's a few boulders there, but they aren't really worth like hunting out around in the woods for them or something to that effect. I
Yeah.
guess he didn't go up the icicle, but because the Tumwater, actually the very first time I went to Leavenworth was in like '03 on a road trip to Squamish. I literally just drove through Highway 2 and I got out at Swiftwater and I was like, cool. There's like 3 boulders visible and the rest are hidden in the trees. I didn't go into the icicle, and I would have like totally done the drive-by as well, and missed it. But no, it's hard to say. Like people were definitely like developing boulders there in like the 80s and 90s for sure. And there was a whole like Seattle kind of Stone Gardens crew that like predated the people that Drew mentioned and that I was buddies with. It was basically like, the 4 big areas had been developed and climbed out, and there were probably boulder problems up to like V8 around like the year 2000, 2002, 2003. It seems like Joel Campbell, who's a super strong Washington boulder, got really excited. Cole Allen, who's like a larger than life character in Washington bouldering, they started going out there like 18 years old and just like scrapping their way up things. Dave Thompson is another like early developer. Johnny grew up in Spokane, and then he went to Boulder for I think just like a year or two. And then so he came back in like 2005 or 2006, and he was like a fixture in Leavenworth for sure. But when I got there, it was like basically every boulder problem between like V8 and V11 was either like a Joel problem or a Cole problem. Kyle was like pretty new climber as well, and was starting to get really psyched on the development side of things. But yeah, the old guidebook, I still have it somewhere. It's literally just like typed out in Microsoft Word, and the directions are like park by the big leaning tree and walk around the back and find I think the hardest one is called blah blah blah. Like it was like literally just like kind of thrown together, but it was really fun. Kind of not having that guide and having that kind of freedom and that open-ended nature to it.
I'm curious, like the process of taking that Microsoft Word doc to then the first print guidebook that you made, was it a difficult process of kind of finding all the actual names and wrangling people up for information, or was it all pretty collaborative within that scene and a pretty easy task?
It wasn't that hard kind of doing it from scratch, because Fred kind of taught me, like, you just come up with like a tree structure, right? And you list out the main areas, then you list out the actual bouldering areas, then you list out boulder, and just kind of do it systematically. On names, I took a lot of liberties at first, like, because there are probably only, I guess there are 200 problems in that old pamphlet, and probably 100 of them had names, but there were things that were like had obviously been climbed. So there were some unnamed problems, but we also took a lot of liberties. And I think I wrote about that in the intro, like, sorry, like hit me up if I renamed your problem, but if you didn't name your V3 and you're really going to be that upset if I named it something adjacent to the cool problem next to it, kind of is what it is. But the hardest part was probably grades. Cole's not too super shy about talking about grades, but like Joel and Johnny, it was like pulling teeth, right? Because they were doing these problems that I couldn't touch, and I would just look at it and be like, do you think that's a V12? They'd be like, I don't know. Like, well, is it like an 11? Like I gotta just put something on the page, and I don't want to be wildly off. But both of those guys are like zero spray, zero grade, zero social media, kind of steeped in the like Rampage era, Chris Sharma, mentality of like, just like do it for the experience without any cheesiness. So that was probably the hardest part, was like the logistics and grades and stuff like that. And then I did a fair bit of like reach out to that old crew to make sure I wasn't like missing problems that they had put up or missing names. They were super supportive, like people like Brian Doyle and Jason Mikos and Jason Dukowitz, who were like 5 to 10 years older than us and had been there 5 to 10 years earlier before they went and did other things. And they were super cool and super receptive and super welcoming. I think there's one problem in Gold Bar where I screwed up. We thought it was an FA and we renamed someone's like cool hard problem, but they were super gracious about that. And, we fixed it in the next one. So
cool. Yeah. And what were some of the problems around that time that were really big news or groundbreaking in difficulty, or the new sickest thing? What were some of the really memorable ascents of that era?
I don't know. Mad Meadows was definitely like an early epicenter. It still is, but that was kind of like the people I thought was like the coolest problem out there for sure when I came. The Cole had just done it a year or two earlier. It was like the big project. The Ram, which is at Mad Meadows, it's like a variation to the Sail. The Sail's like a V9 squeeze problem, and the Ram's like a V11 or 12 different exit. I don't think that sees too much attention these days because it's kind of in a hole, super reachy. It's just not like a really new school boulder problem, but that was like a pretty hot commodity. Both of those are coal problems. I don't know about the Sail, but that's probably the previous generation. Musashi at the Jerry Garcia boulders was originally graded V11 and was like a big crown jewel problem. People kind of learned how to heel hook a little bit better, and now it's like a V9. And then there were still a lot of like open projects, like the Cotton Pony Low had not been done, and that was like a very prominent project. And then the Teacup, which didn't get done for like another, when did that get done, Drew? Like 2012 or something like that.
Boy, yeah, I don't know.
That had like a lot of attention. Johnny was trying it. Dave Thompson, who's another super strong Washington guy, was trying it. The Ladder Project, which is now the Penrose Step, I think people kind of correctly perceive that as like the biggest, best, coolest, hardest problem in Leavenworth, and that someone has yet to top that one in terms of like quality and difficulty and stuff. But that was people weren't touching that one.
That one really signified a new era, that Leavenworth was no longer this little blip on the map, that professional climbers were taking note, and people were going out of their way to go there and try those problems and see those projects. And so that when Carlo Traversi first climbed the Ladder Project, things really started to change for Leavenworth.
So the locals hadn't really been trying that one. Everyone was kind of like, "This is out of our league. Let's wait for the big guns." Or was
no,
it?
They tried it a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
it's just incredibly difficult.
So were people upset when Carlo rolled in and just did it, or was it kind of like a respect thing?
I don't remember that, I also don't remember him, quote unquote, just doing it. Not to say it was difficult. It took him some effort too. It's no problem to be scoffed at, maybe by the current generation, but it still doesn't get climbed, easily by anyone. I would say, I would hope. I don't know. But it is an amazing climb, and it kind of signifies Leavenworth in a lot of unique ways, of this sort of roadside vibe that a lot of the best climbs in Leavenworth have. It's hard to describe, but it really does encapsulate Leavenworth in a nutshell.
Yeah, my first trip to Leavenworth, and only trip, was in 2019. And I remember I was with Brian Nugent, and we went and looked at Penrose, and then walked just down the hill to the river and looked at what would become Hell or High Water. And I think Heads Will Roll had been done at that point. Was that you, Drew, or who was that? Who put that one up?
Yeah, I did those
you.
ones.
So that one had been done, but Hell or High Water had not been climbed, and we kind of like threw the ladder on it and started trying the moves and came kind of close. And my perception was like, wow, I can't believe this amazing line is this close to the road and hasn't been done. I can't even imagine how exciting that must have been in 2005, walking around with all those roadside problems. Were you all aware that you were in this like really special golden era of development there?
I was definitely aware of how cool Leavenworth was. Like I don't know that I had the like total perspective to be like, oh, the golden era is about to start at this era. Like, and I didn't know about like the decades long transition of like how climbing areas develop and mature and stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely just the first time I was walking around with Kyle, it felt like I would always take road trips from the Northeast to go to the places you'd seen in like climbing movies and stuff. And that feeling when you like, if you like drive all night and you get out of the car at 1 a.m. at like Joe's Valley or something, and you go and walk around for a little bit by headlamp, and you're just like, oh, this is like a legit, like top-notch bouldering area. This is what I've like watched movies about, I've fantasized about coming here, you know, shaking with excitement. That's kind of how I felt walking around Leavenworth the first time, coupled with the you know, like there's moss on that face over there. Like, are you kidding me? As opposed to like having it be a fully formed area. Yeah, it kind of seemed like it was limitless a little bit at first.
There was, I think, also a vibe of, you know, doing what seemed super cool and inspiring. And I think for a lot of those guys, like the notion that anyone was developing, quote unquote, you know, a climbing area just wasn't part of the vision. It was, you know, just having fun and climbing and challenging yourselves and doing what looked cool and improbable or imposing or inspiring in any given way, with no notion of that Leavenworth would grow into such, you know, a large area. And, you know, the climbing world we've all seen has just exploded, and that it's impossible to kind of go back in time and imagine what it was like to walk around these places without that idea.
Yeah, and you'd have like a really hard time getting people from outside of the state to like friends to like come and visit and stuff like that. Like I felt like I was like screaming at the top of my lungs to people about how good Leavenworth was, but it's like unless they're on their way to Squamish or something, like most people weren't super interested. Whereas now, if you found like a canyon full of boulders, the second any of it like leaked, right, you'd have lots of people coming in, and it was just very different. It was only like we're talking about like 19 years ago, but it feels kind of fundamentally different, you know?
Yeah, I think every major area has seen that change, and there's seemingly not that many places left to have that golden era in term, at least places that are accessible next to a big city like that, or right next to the road. So maybe for people who are listening who don't know much about Leavenworth, given that boom, it'd be good to kind of talk about area ethics a little bit, the rundown of how the area is laid out. We can talk about Little Bavaria a little bit, because I think that's like pretty jarring if you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Just kind of set the scene for people who might be wanting to visit and how they can do so respectfully and appropriately, and also set themselves up for success.
I guess to start with, Leavenworth is you know, a very tourist centric small town. It's about 2 hours from Seattle, and it was very much like a resource extraction based town up until about the 1960s, I believe. Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that's right.
Yeah, and then it kind of died out, as a lot of those things do. The blue collar, you know, logging and, you know, railroad industries, those things just kind of slowly died out, and it was somewhat reinvented as a tourist destination. And the town was basically rebuilt in this faux Bavarian model because the local geography resembled some of the, you know, Alps scenery, I guess, of Central Europe. And yeah, so like you said, Eric, it is a little jarring when you first show up and you don't maybe you're not expecting accordions and lederhosen, but it will hit you for sure. And it at this point it's become probably Washington's outdoor epicenter, sort of the headquarters of you know, mountain biking and whitewater rafting, and there's some high profile ski resorts in the vicinity, and add to that, rock climbing has made Leavenworth, you know, a big destination for the weekend warrior crowd in the greater Seattle and like King County area. And it has a lot of amenities to make that easy and sustainable. There's lots of campgrounds, there's lots of hotels, there's, you know, highway thoroughfares to get in and out, and grocery stores and all of those things to make it the destination that it is. And then the geography itself, I guess, that you were hinting at, is the rivers have carved out two canyons that are sort of parallel. The Tumwater Canyon, which Highway 2 bisects, that goes east to west from Seattle to Leavenworth, and then onward east through the rest of Washington, as well as Icicle Canyon is a smaller smaller canyon that just has one road that goes off for miles until it turns to dirt, and it accesses various trailheads and campgrounds until it just kind of ends deeper into the Cascades. And in the Icicle Canyon is probably the main destination as far, or sub destination for Leavenworth, and the majority of the areas are accessed off of that little road. And then there's a few other spots. Mountain Home Road is another satellite area, and other satellites have kind of popped up over the years as people have explored more and more. But for the most part, it's all concentrated around the Icicle Canyon and Tumwater Canyon.
I'd say most of the kind of weekend crowd that visits camps. There is tons of lodging in Leavenworth, and there's an Airbnb market as well. But the tourist attractiveness of the city for like the non-outdoor things has it can be like pretty expensive to stay in town and stuff like that, especially if your visit coincides with like a festival weekend. They have dozens of festivals in Leavenworth, particularly around the holidays and Oktoberfest. But coming in the summer, you might coincide with like a hummingbird festival or something like that, and there's 10,000 hummingbird enthusiasts that have like descended on the town. So most people camp. Most of the camping is in the Icicle. There's, I think, like 8 or 9 Forest Service campgrounds, and then there's tons of dispersed camping of various kind of levels. Probably the best in terms of like ethics, the best places to camp are kind of further up the canyons, so that you're not camping in and around the bouldering areas. The Forest Service, so most of the land is managed by the Forest Service. There's little pockets of private property, but by and large, most of the boulders are on Forest Service land, and they are pretty permissive about primitive camping and recreation. So it's a pretty welcoming, pretty safe place. And yeah, that road in the Icicle, the road that Drew was talking about goes, I think, 21 or 22 miles outside of Leavenworth before it ends. And at the end of it, you're, I think, less than 10 miles from Stevens Pass, which is the Cascade Crest. So you're way back into the mountains. And there's really nice camping back there.
In terms of season, when would you recommend people might take a trip?
It's a spring and fall area primarily. Like the spring thaw varies from year to year. This year was a little bit early because we had a low snowpack year. I would say April and October are probably the best months on either end of the summer. You can climb all summer too. It's sort of a desert type. Yeah, it's sort of a desert type climate. So it's cold at night even in the summer. But in August it'll hit 100 during the day. And in the winter it's covered in snow. So you have to be pretty motivated and like have time to tarp things and stuff like that if you want to climb throughout the winter. So there's a couple caves, you can kind of go and get your fix. But
one thing that we've been pretty excited about with Kaya is making the information super accessible, super easy to understand. In essence, spreading people out a little bit and giving the main popular areas kind of a break. In Joe's Valley, the Wheels of Fire boulder always had 1 million people there because that was the boulder that was roadside and people knew how to get to. But by putting the Flu on the map, we're able to kind of spread people out and spread the impact. I know that in Leavenworth, some of those popular areas are forest lands and Mad Meadows, these places. Where are some low-key zones that you think are definitely worth a visit, even if it's your first time, that maybe don't get as much traffic?
Well, like most of those areas are just on the first plateau up from the road, and the next plateau has boulders too. Like Mad Meadows has the airfield, which Drew discovered, and Forest Land has the Locksmith boulders, and there's a few other areas like that where if you just hike another 10 minutes up the trail, you're not going to see anybody. There's also a lot of, I think the analogy to Joe's Valley is pretty apt actually, because there's a lot of like 1 or 2 boulder areas as well. And I think Kaya will be super helpful for people to find those areas, branch out, feel comfortable. Like if you've got 1 day or a day and a half to boulder, you don't want to like waste all your time and energy like bushwhacking and not find a boulder. And I think Kaya will help people have the confidence to go and find those kind of random obscure boulders that don't get visited enough to have a trail, or maybe have a really primitive trail. Yeah.
The Labyrinth is an area that I would mention as just one of the best spots as far as rock quality. It has a short, steep hike that kind of guards A lot of those climbs and somewhat unmatched for Leavenworth as far as rock quality and the spread of problems there are some of the best for the various grades. A lot of the Leavenworth zones over the years kind of came to be from just the base of known cragging areas. The history of the cragging, the crag climbing and slab climbing dates back, decades earlier than a lot of the bouldering popularity. So as the popular areas kind of got overwhelmed, so to speak, discovering and exploring some of the other crags and kind of hiking to the bases of those was one of the ways that a lot of the new boulders got found. Yeah,
that's how the labyrinth got found. Just
exactly.
Jen's and Max went cragging at Clem's Holler, which is like 30 minutes above the road, and they're like, "You guys should check this out. There's like lots and lots of boulders we walked by on the way up there." So it was like, climbers had been walking by there for decades, or at least 10 years, to go and do the moderate sport climbing that Leavenworth used to be known for. But, below a lot of cliffs, there's boulders. We would use the old edition of Victor Kramer's Leavenworth Rock to like scout out boulders.
Yeah, and now, as you kind of alluded to earlier, it's starting to run out of whole new areas that can be found. Most of those zones have kind of been picked through, and you're having to work a little bit harder to find new stuff. Drew, tell me a little bit about Autobahn, because you had to ford a river for that, right?
Yeah, that Autobahn specifically was a problem I did a couple years ago, but it kind of also represents Leavenworth in a strange nutshell way, like I alluded to with Penrose, in the sense that it is roadside, but it's on the other side of the river. in Tumwater Canyon, you could see it every time you drive up and down the canyon, but couldn't really get to it easily. Also, in a way, sort of represents a lot of the development as the years went by, was people tackling the things that were still in the main areas, but were maybe too highball or, too hard, or had a weird landing that needed manicuring. So in addition to just hiking further, a lot of the sort of new school development happened, that new vision that people were bringing from the gym on how to take on these bigger climbs and more difficult climbs with that just maybe didn't have like a flat, grass or dirt landing. So anyway, I mean, there's a ton of development and amazing climbs that happened between that and what, led to me climbing on Autobahn a few years later. But yeah, over the years, you drive by on your way to Swiftwater and you see on the other side of the river this big roof that's just nestled like right on the water, and it's impossible not to stare at it and just wonder, like, is there a line in that roof? But it also, the angle of the roof and the way the river is nestled in makes it look, when you drive by, like that the water goes all the way underneath. So I think for a long time people probably just thought, oh, there's what a cool feature, but it's got a little like pond, or it's kind of flooded out underneath it. And the Wenatchee River that cuts through Highway 2 is not, a little trickle. It's a full-on river, so you couldn't really get to it. But a few years ago, maybe like 2019 or so, late summer, when the snowpack fully melts, the rivers drop pretty significantly. And so into August, September, you get the lowest water lines in the area, and we actually get kind of a neat sub-season of sort of river bouldering that comes up in the icicle and the Tumwater, of really cool problems that only come about that one time a year when the water is super low. And they have really interesting erosional features of like polished rock and pockets and wacos and all of those cool things. But anyway, I just decided I needed to know if there was a line there, and actually just swam across the river in a big eddy with no gear or anything, just like a 90-degree August day. The water was low, the rapids weren't scary, and so just swam over and totally freaked out when I saw that there could be a line. And it wasn't anything like it looks like now, but I could tell there was in fact an amazing roof climb that was there. And Leavenworth is kind of known for its like gymnastic featured granite, and so I kind of figured there would be something there, but you never know what, does it start all the way back, and is it going to be really easy or really hard, or is it going to be choss and all that. But but yeah, I could tell there was a climb there, and with some work, it could be one of the coolest climbs around. And it did take a lot of work. It didn't come together that season by any means. And I don't know if you want if you want the long story for this right now.
Yeah,
I guess
let's
I'm
hear it.
getting carried away.
Yeah, you got me all zoned now. I'm like
Yeah,
living it.
yeah. So that first season, literally all I did was I just knew that there was something there, and spent probably that first day just pushing rocks out of the landing into the river, because it wasn't flat underneath it like it is kind of now. It was a jumbled mess, and I kind of was just laying on my back doing like leg leg squatting big boulders out from underneath it, and like pulling the easy choss flakes off, and then had to make another, make time to come back later with more wire brushes, pads, all that stuff, and even sort of logistically figure out how I would do that. And so that first season, I didn't really do any of the climbing on it. And it wasn't until a year or two later, I think around 2020 or 2021, that I actually managed to get over there with pads. The idea of paddleboarding over to it, which has been done a few times now, also just like, I don't know, I just didn't think of it maybe at the time, or I didn't personally own one at the time. And so I just had to scout for a place where you could walk across the river with pads, and you had to wait until the very end of the summer season for the water line to be the lowest to get over there with the gear to clean it. And so that's why it took many seasons to kind of slowly piece together. The first season I actually got to climb on it, I was able to do sort of a halfway start from there's kind of a mailbox slot mini jug, like halfway through the problem, that was kind of an obvious high start. And I was able to climb it from there. At maybe like a B9 or 10 grade, but the obvious climb started all the way down, sitting on like a perfect little pedestal right next to the water line on like really clean flat edges. And so I knew it would go from there. That was the full line, and it represented a style that I find like to be the most appealing in climbing, with just like steep and athletic, power endurance. Like you could fall at any point of the climb, and it has like a rad sort of jump dyno move in the middle of it. I mean, like I couldn't imagine a cooler climb. There's a crazy like 2-finger pocket at the end. Leavenworth actually has a lot of strange erosional features like that for a granite area to have little pockets, and even big pockets, like the sort of the namesake Waco of was, which is a really, really classic problem. So it has one of those as well on the sort of outro sequence. There's like a 2-finger, like 2-knuckle deep pocket just in the middle of a blank wall, that if that wasn't there, I don't know if you could actually do the exit sequence. And then I couldn't do any of the bottom moves though. And that was like the kind of like the coolest part, but also the most frustrating, where I knew that was the full line, but I just wasn't strong enough. I could hold some positions, but it wasn't linking the moves by any means. And so, yeah, of course, the stereotypical like training, you put that in the back of my mind. That occurred for, a season or two. And then actually what kind of turned the tide was the last few summers, I've done some bigger like international trips, and went out of my way. I knew that a lot of the climbing in Norway actually was like incredibly steep, and also that athletic style, and the rock quality looked amazing. I'd met some of the big names in the Norway climbing scene in other various trips, and I just always thought that the climbing in those areas looked so cool, and so decided to go there. I think it was 2022, for a summer. Did that and spent a lot of time climbing these like long, steep, athletic roofs, and that I was hoping after that, when I come back from that, it would time perfectly for when the water was low enough to go back to Autobon. So after that summer trip, I came back, and yeah, I could do the moves that I couldn't do before, but it was still super limit, but it was all there, and I basically proceeded to siege it until the water was going to come up too high. And fortunately, the end of that fall season, like later into October, I was able to actually climb the full line in like a somewhat ridiculous full limit send go. I wanted it pretty bad for sure, and I had dropped the end a few times from the bottom. There's a few moves throughout that are pretty low percentage, so it wasn't the type of climb where once you get through the crux, you can just keep doing it. I struggled to continually get through the bottom crux, which has sort of a like iron cross move, and then if I did that, I was usually pretty tapped out to then stick the dyno move after. That's a few moves later, and then there's this pocket move after that, and you just gas out, and I would drop it from the end. And so the first few times I got through that, then I would fall off the end too tired, and then it took a lot of effort to get back through, and wasn't actually sure I would do it that year, but yeah, squeaked it out in the end, and then have slowly in the years since then shared that climb with a lot of other folks, and taken a few friends over there, like really strong, capable climbers, and to see them enjoy it and just be like just as flabbergasted as like at the style. It's very much like a Swiss style roof. Yeah, so that's probably been the most satisfying thing, is like see these crushers like Brian Nugent, like Andy Lamb, like Sam Wolf recently, like these guys go there and just do it in a session or so or two, when it took me days and days, I mean dozens of days over 3 different years to fix the landing and clean the choss and then do the moves and all of that. And then it's pretty wild to see people just do it. Like but also think that it's like super cool. So anyway, long story.
Thanks for sharing, and congratulations. That's a sick one. I'm excited to check it out one day too, hopefully. What was the inspiration for the name?
It was just sort of a reference to the sort of, I think, the hilarity of the faux Bavarian thing with Leavenworth. The highway is kind of zooming by, and so you're very visible there. Actually, funny enough, the Google Maps car was mapping that part of the highway one day, and I think still, if you click on the right part of the highway on the street view and turn the camera to look, you can see me sitting under the.
No way.
That's how.
That's amazing.
That's true. So
I'm gonna have to find that photo.
Yeah, that's maybe
on
like
Instagram or something.
a testament to how long it took me to send. And then yeah, I mean, I would go there at night a couple times with lights, and then yeah, there's just cars driving by, people honking. It's kind of just like a hilarious location, but it also fits that Leavenworth roadside. All the best boulders are right by the road. They roll all the way down. Yeah, so the name was kind of a reference to all of that. And it's it's short, it's easy to remember. I just thought it sort of encapsulated all of those factors.
Yeah, that's a great name. Great, and a great story. Thanks for sharing. Kelly, do you have any problems that you had a similar kind of epic siege on, whether it was a first ascent or a boulder that you repeated over the years?
Not really. I think I've only spent like more than 10 days on one problem, and I'm kind of embarrassed to even say the name of the problem because it's like 8 feet tall. But most of my kind of memorable experiences in Leavenworth were like finding a new boulder or something, right? And just that feeling of like, this is a totally untouched rock, and there's a line up it. And that, I don't know, coming from New Hampshire, where most of the boulders you'd find were like featureless, or they were kind of lumpy. Like if you found like an overhanging face with holds, it was like, pop the champagne and like tell everybody, like it was like a big deal. And getting to like have that experience like somewhat regularly in Leavenworth, like if you just like set off between 2 existing areas and hike way up the hill and find something and be like, spend a day cleaning it, go back, spend the day climbing on it, go back and do it. That's really fun. Probably my only, just because I've slowed down so much with climbing, there's my only kind of memorable experience in the last couple of years is there's I think I've taken Drew to this, but there's a little bit of schist in Leavenworth. There's like a couple boulders at Swiftwater that are this weird schist. It's a completely different stone than the granite in Leavenworth, and up kind of a side road off of the icicle that goes up to, it's the road you drive on to go up to the enchantments and Lake Kolchak, which are like really popular hikes. When I was snowmobiling up there to go backcountry skiing a couple of years ago, I could see this overhang way off in the woods across a creek, and just kind of made a mental note of it and went back there. Probably took me a few days to clean that one, but it's a 45 degree. It's probably only like a V4 or something like that. It's kind of reminds me, it's a somewhat lame version of Ghetto Simulator in Waco, and that it's just like a roof with like in-cut holds, and it's long, it's fun. And that was just like fun because it was A, I can still put up boulder problems, but B, it was like totally unique for Leavenworth, like especially in the icicle to find a schist, an overhanging schist boulder, which was very random, but I don't even think that one got a name. I'm naming it Autobon actually, so I can tell people I did Autobon.
I thought you called it Cold Cold Ground after the Tom Waits song.
That's right, I did.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Classic
You're the
song.
better historian than I am. Yeah.
Shout out to Tom Waits.
Yeah.
I think I probably would also speak for both of us when I would say most of our most memorable experiences were just being sort of in the audience for when some of those guys doing a lot of the most classic first ascents now, like, you know, seeing Johnny stick the dyno on turbulence, you know, watching Joel just crush these crimps that we couldn't even imagine, and Cole doing these span moves that, you know, were just massive. Those were some of the most, you know, long lasting highlights. Just kind of being part of the scene, and it wasn't really as much about like the specific climbs you were doing, but just seeing what those guys could do.
There wasn't a lot of like sieging going on. It didn't feel like, it was kind of like wake up in the morning, like making coffee, and it's like, what should we check out today? You know,
a lot of the newer stuff now too is like Kelly kind of hinted at, like, you know, putting up climbs in these more satellite hiking zones. That's a lot of that has been happening the last few years, but in that sort of golden age, it didn't really matter. You didn't need to siege. You didn't need to plan ahead, where we just could wake up and walk around the corner from one established climb, and there was another amazing, cool thing to do, and it was just right there. And, you know, we could watch those guys do it and move on to the next one, and maybe it got a name, maybe it didn't, and just, you know, it was just kind of like having fun, like doing whatever, messing around on the weekend. That's in a nutshell.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty awesome.
Fortunate.
Yeah, pretty special. Not a lot of people get that experience for sure. One that you mentioned in the little interview questions that we sent out before this, Kelly, was Angelina Jolie, which I tried on my first trip with some really strong climbers who were there, Tristan Chen and Austin Purdy. And we were pretty haggard from a long day, but all three of us got totally shit on, and we like could not do the boulder. I remember it being super technical. There was like a really small edging left foot, I think, and you kind of like go up this immaculate slope or rail. What was your experience with that one that made it so memorable?
It's probably like maybe not like physically hardest I've ever tried, but the most, like, literally being like falling for like several, but still climbing for like several moves in a row. Like, it was kind of like a blackout type experience, where you like, I kind of woke up and was like grabbing the lip. I just thought that's a really, and it's just such a cool and iconic looking and memorable climb. It was a project when I got to Leavenworth, and I tried it when it was a project, and then I think Joel did it first, Joel Campbell. And then it took me another year or two to do it. Yeah, I just think it's a really special problem. Very like condition dependent and technical. You can't like muscle your way up it, right? You need to like climb it on its own terms a little bit. So yeah, that's probably one of my like top 5 problems.
Yeah, you should explain the name as well.
Well, it bears like a vague resemblance to Brad Pitt in the Peak District, you know.
Which a lot of people might not even know that problem.
I know. So first go and get some old VHS tapes of Ben Moon and Jerry Moffat, and but no, there's a famous like V9 back when that was like absolute cutting edge on the gritstone in the Peak District, and I totally started climbing like wearing out VHS tapes of like The Real Thing and One Summer Bouldering in the Peak, and Free Waco, and then Rampage. And that Brad Pitt problem was kind of like burned into my brain. I think it was an unnamed project. I maybe can take credit for naming it and or suggesting that Joel name it Angelina Jolie. But it's just, I mean, it's also like it's twice as tall as the problem in the UK. Drew, you're smirking. I don't know if I'm
Yeah, no,
there's some like
it's
double
an awesome
entendre with
time.
the names I'm not aware of.
No, I
Yeah.
love that. There's a lot of Leavenworth has a lot of names that are sort of homages to other famous boulders or climbs throughout the world. And that's also a very unique sort of fun tidbit. It's kind of like a winking gesture of like if you get it, you're part of like maybe the cooler club or the old guard or whatever you want to call it. But it provides some character to Leavenworth, and that maybe some of the newer bouldering areas don't have as much. Maybe that's just like local bias. I don't know. But
Yeah.
it is an
No, there's
amazing
like a
climb.
lot of like fun backstories for names and stuff like how was got its name, because like I can't remember who it was. It may have been Dave Thompson was like excitedly talking at a campfire about like, oh, I found this like cool new project. Like it's like such a cool project. It's got this basketball hoop, Waco, you jump to it. Like, it's like it is such a cool project. And Johnny is just like, was. And Dave's like, what? He's like, it was a project until I did it. Like he had already climbed it. I don't know if that's like somewhat apocryphal or not, but yeah, you can kind of see a little bit of like the history of the area and the stories, and, like in the problem names and stuff. It's pretty fun.
Wow, that's a good one. Yeah, I'd heard of the Angelina Jolie backstory, but I had not heard was. That's I also wasn't aware that there were a number of problems that were homages to other famous boulders. What are some other examples of that?
Yeah, can you think of any, Drew?
Green Lung comes to mind immediately to
Oh,
me.
for sure.
Is a popular test piece at the JY boulders that is similar to Angelina Jolie and sort of this like off vertical tech granite power style. And it has sort of a shallow pocket on it and some wide compression that also resembles another famous UK or like Ben Moon contribution, the Black Lung at Joe's Valley. So Green Lung is sort of Leavenworth's version of that, and I don't know, the green lung side of it is probably also a reference to just like the amount of cannabis fueled days spent out there.
At that
So
same area, the problem Mad Max is we found that in the winter, and was hiking around with our good friend Max Hassan, who I love dearly and who Drew and I were hanging out with this weekend actually. But the JY boulders was in that pamphlet guide, and they're like the two boulders that are sitting in a field were in there, but there's a half dozen other random boulders, and right below the crag there's this jumble of rocks, and we went in there and I was like, I think there's a line here, and Max was like kind of dismissive. He's just like, no, like that's like esoteric like V15 stuff or whatever. And we cleaned it up, and I made Max go back out there and schlep up the hill with pads like all winter. And that's where the problem Mad Max is. And then Johnny did Thunderdome, which is another Leavenworth test piece, different exit. But the name Mad Max just comes from like Max being all pissed off because he was walking there every single day for me to do my project, which I was progressing on, and he was not very pleased about that. And he can be a little grumpy anyway. So Mad Max was a homage to him.
Nice, that's a good one too.
Kelly, I've always wondered the story behind like the Ruminator, which is a very classic, one of the early highball climbs in Leavenworth that was probably a bit ahead of its time in forest land. It's kind of this one of the centerpiece boulders of forest land. But I'd always wondered where that name came from.
That had its name in the pamphlet. I don't know who like did it first and who named it or whatever, but the Hesitator, the V2 slab at Barney's Rubble, I made up that name kind of similar to the Ruminator, right? But yeah, I think of that as with that. So the Ruminator is like a 20 2 foot tall, like overhanging B5 crack. It's very like athletic. It's not like a crack that you jam. It's a crack that you do like weird kind of over your head sideways moves and stuff like that. And it's a climb that you like spend a long time looking at it before you're like, okay, I'm going to commit and climb this thing. Because it's just scary looking. And I just assumed the name was like someone, you know, it was their process involved ruminating on it.
Yeah.
But you used to be able to actually wrap down it because there was a huge dead tree over the edge. And so you could like naturally wrap down it. But that tree's since long gone. So
How about the Kolchak Lake stuff? Tell me about what's going on there.
Yeah, Kolchak Lake, Kelly mentioned earlier, you know, probably arguably the most popular destination for the average Leavenworth weekend visitor is hiking up into this area known as the Enchantments, which is like a high elevation mountain plateaus of these like alpine lakes, snow-fed lakes, and exposed granite spires making up like various peaks in the area. Mount Stewart, most notably, you know, one of the tallest peaks in Washington. Argonaut, Dragon Tail, Prusik, all of these sort of iconic granite spires and these beautiful lakes surrounding them. And it's not easily accessed, but it is a place that many people visit each summer and do this sort of through hike, which is a roughly like 20-mile loop, big hike that can take you through the area. And all the exposed rock has also made it a big destination for the summer alpine climbing scene. Lots of really classic climbs in the area are up there. Big multi-pitch trad climbs and some, you know, more new school style, harder mixed climbs. But also the potential for bouldering up there is pretty big if you're willing to hike a pad that far. But anyway, Kolchak Lake is about 5 miles or so in. There's lots of talus around the lake, like a lot of these alpine lakes. They just have, you know, these mountains surrounding them that have just dumped boulders onto the shoreline. So over the years, people like Cole Allen, like Johnny, started exploring these more off the beaten path destinations where they could get away from the crowds, still do new climbs, and find good conditions in the months when maybe the areas in the lower ice school and Tumwater Canyon started to get a little too warm. And so I started going with them and just seeing that there's, yeah, like everything else, there's just tons to be done if you're willing to walk for it. So the last few years I've spent some summertime hiking pads up there and have done a lot of other really cool climbs up there. A lot of that stuff has also remained sort of undocumented in the sense that it's just sort of word of mouth. Bring a friend and then they bring a friend, and you know, a lot of the classic problems have names, but tons of the stuff that has been climbed is just, you know, remained unnamed. And in a lot of ways it sort of speaks to what Leavenworth was like when we first went there, and sort of those same themes are popping up in these newer obscure areas of just like folks going out and going climbing for a day and not really worrying about the name or grade of something, but just kind of trying to have a fun day out in a beautiful spot. So yeah, if you're willing to hike a pad on a lot of those trails, you will find amazing climbs that are most of the time right in the trail, and you'll get a ton of people asking why you're carrying that thing on your back. What is that thing you're carrying? Is it a bed? Is it a boat? What is that thing? But yeah, Washington is surely blessed with like tons of alpine climbing as well, and I would say the next golden age might be all the alpine areas getting more documented, and more people venturing out into some of those summer high elevation destinations, and not just in Leavenworth, in all of the Cascades. Maybe that's the next frontier for our Kaya guide, is like continuing to expand into some of those other zones that sort of round out the full year climbing season for a place like Leavenworth, when, like Kelly mentioned, you know, in June, July, August, the temperatures can be very high. So But if you hike up to Kolchak Lake or the Snow Lakes, you can find climbing temps that are nice and cool, like some of the other spring months that you get lower in the canyon. And the rock is excellent up there. If anything, it's like we joke that it's too good. It just doesn't make holds often enough. Like you just get huge blank faces and blank roofs, and you're really lucky if you can find a line that's got featured granite like all the way up an overhang or along an arête or something like that.
But it's like perfect, like salt and pepper, crisp, angular granite. It's kind of like the archetype of like what good granite is.
It's definitely on the map for alpine climbing in the summer. There's a lot of well-known classic multi-pitch routes in the greater Leavenworth, mountains and then in the enchantments. People visit there a lot.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be sweet to see that in the guide one day. In the meantime, nice to keep the adventure alive a little bit, And so for those climbers maybe coming from the gym and going to Leavenworth for their first time, is there anything unique to Leavenworth that's worth noting?
I don't know, probably it's not like the most wonderful topic, but using the bathroom is like a big thing in Leavenworth because there is a lot of dispersed camping and there's a lot of other user groups in the canyon too, right? There's like hikers, kayakers, mountain bikers, and then just people that are just out there to camp. That's probably even outnumbers boulderers. And so I think for people that are not like, didn't come up with like an outdoor mentor and who are like relatively new to being out in the outdoors and being camping, it's like really imperative that people kind of understand you can't just like walk 10 feet and go poop and leave it because there's just too many people. And it's not like even like the west side of the mountains where it rains like 200 days a year, it's just very different in Leavenworth. And the Leavenworth Mountain Association has for the last like 5 or more years, they've established like a few porta potties in both canyons through donations, which they strongly encourage people to use. There's one in the Forestland parking lot. There's one at the Sword parking. It's really not too much of a burden to like hop in the car and drive 2 miles to use a porta potty, rather than like just kind of going for it. That's probably the one thing. I mean, that applies everywhere, but it's more important in Leavenworth just because it's a drier climate. It's a narrow canyon. You think you're in the middle of nowhere, but you're not, especially if you're like relatively new to the outdoors.
I would also mention Leavenworth is pretty susceptible to some of the fragility that comes with wet rock, more so than a lot of other notable granite areas. The granite here is pretty porous, and although it's the good side of that might be that the amount of featured steeper climbs there is, the bad side of that is that it also kind of becomes pretty friable when it's wet, and the increases in traffic, and maybe some of the lack of mentorship and those other factors have led to many climbs breaking over the years. It's kind of become the norm, and maybe like a somewhat dark joke each season of like which classic is going to be the one to change this year, as more and more people climb and are somewhat, I don't know if maybe ignorant is the right word, but ignorant to what can happen when you climb on wet rock. And we see a lot of that education increasing in sandstone areas around the world, but it affects other rock types as well. And yeah, the Leavenworth granite is not the most bomber as maybe Yosemite or Squamish or Tahoe or many of the other top granite areas that come to mind for people.
Also being like a weekend destination, I think some people might not understand that it was like raining Tuesday through Thursday when they get out there, or if it is raining a little bit, they drove 2.5 hours and they went camping and they're here to climb. I feel like there's a little bit of a impatience could be driving that a little bit too.
Yeah, good to know. Yeah, I had no idea that it was particularly susceptible to that. So definitely a good thing to note. Anything else that you guys want to leave on? I think we can wrap up pretty soon here.
come to Leavenworth and enjoy it and be respectful and be thankful of like this amazing area that we get to visit that has good access. Like I said, it's friendly, it's safe. They want you there as a tourist. tourist. And yeah, just put in another plug for Leavenworth.
Yeah, I can't think of much to add besides that. Like it's just kind of like a place that's become made to be a destination to have fun outside. And so try to take care of it so that the next person can have the same experience you're having. And yeah, just like remember the long view, I guess.
Well, amazing. Thank you guys so much for chatting. That was super interesting to get some context, and I liked all the stories and history that you guys were willing to share. So yeah, if you're watching, check out their awesome hard work in Kaya and look out for the paper guide down the road. And
yeah, and check out the Kaya guide obviously goes without saying, like there's new problems going in there each season. Like, I mean, people are still doing new boulders. The golden age is, not over. Like there's been new stuff going in this just the last couple of days. We put new problems on the app. So check it out. Yeah, there's a new boulder list on the app where like all the newest stuff that pops up just goes right there. So you can see like where new stuff is to go try.
Nope. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, guys. If you see these folks around Leavenworth, give them a fist bump, buy them a beer. Yeah.
Thanks for having us. This was
tuning
super
in.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this was a good time.